thank you, Eva, and everyone from the local team for organizing this and the invitation. They're telling me I talk a bit too fast, so if I'm talking too fast, please let me know. Could you put the other presentation, please? So, although I'm going to speak about Mexico, which is very far away from here, both geographically and in terms of policy, I would even dare to say in terms of culture around drugs. I will try to address some of the things that have been brought up here that come from these differences and the different sides where drug checking has been portrayed. So then, first of all, just sharing a little bit about our project in Mexico. The Substance Analysis Program is a harm reduction program or service that is being developed both in these on-site and off-site models. So on-site in the festivals, events, parties, concerts, cultural events, health-related events, and then the off-site, meaning the lab, right? So a lab, a very improvised and out of resources lab, because there is no support or government involvement. So this all happens through civil society, volunteer engagement and work, and therefore the lab requirements, meaning the glassware, the precursors, to produce the reagents, all the lab equipment is either collected through donations or bought bulk quantities, very cheap price, informally as a civil society group. And the service is offered through different means and linked in the aspect of the communication efforts, the campaigns around drug education, the universe of drugs, and several other resources are developed with the collaboration of the Youth Institute of Mexico City. So the messages, the harm reduction campaign, what we also call effective prevention strategies to blend these different perceptions about if harm reduction promotes drug use, enables drug use, and why are we not doing prevention. But then it's an easy way to express that effective harm reduction strategies actually prevent some drug use, and they have the same objectives as the general classic traditional prevention strategies, which means increase of the age of the experimental drug use so that no teenagers or minors or younger people start experimenting with drugs, to prevent the health implications of drug use, which means people dying, which means chronic degenerative health implications through drug abuse, which means behavior disorders around compulsive or problematic drug use, in the sense of readdressing what is being built on the idea of addiction from a different place, because of the stigma that is on top of the word addiction, and the fact that medical experts, both in psychiatry and neuroscience, are moving away from the word and the concept of addiction because it's too narrow to express the complexity of the behavior of an individual, and behavior disorders that tend to go with these compulsive actions have many different causes that are not just linked to pharmacological chemical stimuli. So we have these three kinds of interventions or spaces for what we do as a substance analysis program. Most of it is based around the information and the info stand. So this aspect of breaking down the barriers to allow community of usually historically marginalized individuals who have been excluded from conversation, who are usually persecuted out of criminalizing punitive policies, who are usually reduced to these vice-driven questionable morals low life of criminal world related to illicit drug markets. And what does that mean? It means that people who usually don't ask anyone, who usually don't go for health assessment, information, evaluation, treatment, or services, feel more free and invited and comfortable to reach out for drug-related education, harm reduction supplies, advice, or counseling, or linking to other health-related services when there is a peer to talk to and engage with. So horizontal peer education models, which means the engagement of the community of people who use drugs and civil society to link in a horizontal, non-diagonal, non-vertical way to the community of people who use drugs, allows a broader population to come closer to these services. We have the substance analysis as a service on-site and off-site, so people can know about the content of the substances. And I'll go just a little bit further into the kind of testings that we do, because as I said, since we don't have government participation, collaboration, or resources, not only government, we also don't have the support of academic institutions within Mexico because of the fear there exists to link anything to drugs because of the war on drugs in Mexico and how it links to narcos and how it links to organized crime rings and cartels and how it links to corruption and government officials and officers. Therefore, nobody wants to disclose or open the Pandora box. And so it's a very discreet topic within Mexico. And still, we try to take it as furthest way as possible in the sense of the quality, the accuracy, and the results that we can offer. So you can see here on the right, a thin layer chromatography testing, which is the cheapest way of separating the chemical contact of a sample, the chemical content of a sample, without a machine. So we do that very easily with lab equipment, which is very cheap. And you can see on the left a UV testing device for LSD sample, right? So you can see how the LSD shines and is fluorescent under UV light. This is usually the easiest and quickest way to screen LSD or the immediate analogs, meaning 1-PLSD, AL-LAD, and these other very, very, very similar compounds, because any other compound that is present in blotter paper will not be fluorescent under UV light, right? So it's a first screen to say it has this kind of alkaloid indolic ring compounds that are fluorescent, or it doesn't, and if it doesn't, it requires further testing. Here you can see a blurry sheet of the thin layer chromatography with the test results, which means each one of these vertical lines is the drugged content of a chemical sample, meaning a powder, a crystal, or a blotter paper, or a pill. And then each one of the stains and spots that you can see there are the identified chemical compounds that we can compare with the first columns on the left. So you can see that many of the samples contain more than one substance. And let's say that the downside of this kind of testing, which is very, very, very cheap and can be done in your bathroom, basically, is that it doesn't provide quantitative data. So there is no way to tell about the amount of each one of the substances, but you can very clearly identify each one of the compounds, and you can double check with the reagent testing after the TLC sheet has been revealed under UV light. This is the only semi-quantitative test that we do, so it's semi-quantitative precipitative tests with cocaine and just cocaine. So cocaine samples, we are able to identify cocaine, the amount of cocaine in a certain level of thresholds, so from 0 to 25%, I think, 25 to 50%, 50 to 75, and over 75%. Then we can identify derivatives of cocaine, so procaine, lidocaine, other local anesthetics, and then we can identify with the TLC other compounds, and then we have a semi-quantitative result for the quantity of cocaine, and then we have the open list of different things present in the powder. So I'll just go with this set of not so updated numbers. This is just to say that this has been growing. The project is 4 years now. And in the first 2 years, there was this slow process of people feeling comfortable and opening to the idea of going, revealing the fact that they're bringing illegal drugs in a public space, and then asking about the content through the substance analysis service. So the first year it was 244, the second year it was 352. We have 540 samples for 2017, and in the few months of 2018 that we've been working, it's over 500 samples now. So by the end of the year, hopefully it will be around 1,000. So we can see the incremental tendency of more people coming to the service, to use the service, about the mouth-to-mouth information. Why? Because we do not publish our results anywhere. We have policy to keep it as discreet as possible, focusing on the community of people who use drugs and people who use the service because of the dangers of being a threat to organized crime and cartels in Mexico, which is something we do not want. So by publishing and making public information about the dangers, risks, contamination, or low quality of substances within a market that is run by organized crime and cartel groups, we are putting ourselves and the community of people who use the service at risk. So it is something that we try to keep very low profile. And then we can see that it's not so much broad diversity of substances that are being tested. So this is just to say a few examples of 340 LSD tests. We can see that there's over 50% of positive. In this case, it's a good sign because it's not usual that LSD is adulterated. So once you find a sample that has LSD, it is extremely rare that it will be mixed with some other thing. So this 68.53% is the only one positive number, let's say, that it's trustworthy or that it's concrete. All these other positives, let's say, for example, with MDMA, of a 204 total of samples, only 126 were positive, which means 126 samples had MDMA. It doesn't mean that the 126 samples only had MDMA, right? So this is another level of the limitations of the testing. So this is to say, many of these results are based on the reagent testing by itself. Some of them are based on the thin layer chromatography, and as it was mentioned before, the ideal model or system is a combination of the HPLC, the high profile liquid chromatography, with the mass spectrometry, so HPLC and MS as the combination for developing qualitative and quantitative results so that it's easier to discuss about the potential risks and implications of the use of a sample that was tested. So this information is limited, is non-conclusive, and it's not safe, as to say that you can take informed decisions based on this, but it's better than nothing, right? So in the sense of the steps of risk, the ladder of risk, and the harms that are possible, it's always better the more information you have. So talking about information and how this is distributed, we also come to this notion, right, about parties, raves, festivals, illegal rave festivals, having underage minors present. So we, since we do have and keep record of the data that we're collecting and gathering, and we do have open information exchange with authorities, health authorities, and even law enforcement authorities within Mexico City and the federal government, we maintain the age range starting in 18, and then the underage, which is stated there, is not included in the reports or formal communication, meaning we brush off a little bit to say these people didn't respond to their age, so that we are able to offer the service to underage minors which were already planning on using their drugs in a context where it would be more illegal to engage and interact in drug-related conversation, information, and harm reduction services with an underage minor without the consent of their parents or their tutors, right? All of this is done based on this premise that in the pragmatic principle or pragmatic approach of harm reduction, that this situation is already taking place. It will take place regardless if we are there or not, but the more inclusive, open, accessible, friendly, functional, efficient harm reduction strategy and service we have, the more people will come to it, meaning the more underage minors who are planning to use drugs in a rave festival will come to it. And this means that, as it was mentioned before, a lot of people are actually very interested both to learn about what the substances are doing and to be safe themselves and to keep their community safe, to keep their friends safe. So then in this idea, talking about drugs to anyone is never a waste of time. The leaflet that comes along with the idea that, oh, it's better to know what's in your pill than not to know, and by reading this leaflet you might save yourself from a visit to the hospital, you might save yourself from a very negative memory of someone dying next to you because the pill was adulterated. And it's not only that. Whenever you learn about interesting drug facts, you can share them with your friends. Whenever you start understanding about the story of prohibition and why some drugs are legal and why some drugs are illegal, just to go back to the fact that legal substances, talking about tobacco, kill 6 million people each year. Legal substances, talking about alcohol, kill 150,000 people each year. Legal substances coming from the pharma industry kill hundreds and thousands of people each year. When we put together all the people dying from illicit drug trade and substance use, illegal drugs being used each year, it doesn't come up to 50,000. It's less than 50,000, so that's all the different illegal substances put together, right? So it's not about the fact that legal drugs, which are available, have a bar. You can learn about them? Not really. You can see the marketing campaigns. You can read the labels. But what does it mean to have certain percentage of ethanol in a drink? People are usually oblivious to it. So although we assume there's a culture built around alcohol, the fact is hundreds of thousands of people each year are dying out of alcohol abuse, misuse, or problematic use within a legal framework. So then that means the educational efforts, the communication, the messages around tobacco, around alcohol, around out of prescription use of pharmaceutical chemicals should be readdressed in the same way as what we are suggesting for illegal drugs, which means being honest, being unbiased, being accessible, being non-judgmental about the information and about how this information can be put to use by everyone, meaning a clinician, a health provider, a psychiatrist, a psychotherapist, a teacher, a parent, or a drug user, right? So this information, which should be accessible and readily available even in schools and even in middle school and even in primary school. Why? Because at least in Mexico, it's 10 or 11 years old, the threshold where people are engaging in their experimental drug use. And that is something that, although we wouldn't want to see, is happening, is a fact. Addressing the fact requires hyper-complex, multi-layered strategies that go along with this. Sorry to move this. That go along with this, the interest or the reasons people have to test the service. You can see that the main one is the quality of the substance. So although health is important, recreational drug use has certain intent, which is basically to have fun, to have a good time, to be high in a space like a festival where it's allowed or almost allowed in the sense that there's more permissive context in these spaces that have an industry around it. So entertainment industry makes use of this permissive context. Sports make use of this permissive context, so an underage minor can drink a beer more easily in a sport event than in the bar, where you may get the ID requirement. So this is the case in all these different contexts, but there's this other interests, or there's this other reasons for why people would want to know about it. So they go to many different places, and we try to take that into consideration when we start addressing the messages we have. So then all of this is done in collaboration, in communication, and in an active networking effort, basically to recreate what you have here for years and years and years related to TEDI, the Trans-European Drug Information Platform, related to NewNet, which is a new civil society platform that is taking the torch and moving forward with some things that weren't picked up by the European Union as a whole, or that didn't receive the funding and budget that was required, and therefore civil society stepping up in that sense in an organized effort within the European Union. So because we have the format, because we have the reference, because we have the framework of reference of this European model, in Mexico we are pushing forward to the development of TADI, the Trans-American Drug Information Platform, under the guidance of Energy Control, which is based in Spain, and with close connection with CheckIt and other European-based drug checking services. But then it extends to Colombia, Argentina. I mean, because it's trans-American, it also includes Canada, so Karmic and Tripper from Canada. SSDP is from the States, CSSDP is a Canadian one, but SSDP is also here, so it's just interesting to say that regardless of the national level, city level, or even local level policy changes, in many cases, student-driven groups, activists or like activated groups of students, have managed to get universities to provide testing kits within the campuses in Australia and other places. They have gotten the police officers sometimes, and then city government sometimes, to promote and provide testing kits. And all of this is just saying the immediate first tool, which is a take-home testing kit, is something that is not illegal everywhere. It's something that is quite accessible, quite cheap, and it works a little bit, right? So it's a very nice first step. There are many other steps to take, but then in Mexico, the situation around the presence of which drugs are there, what are the adulterants, what are the drug trends, what's the cultural context about speaking about drugs, about, you know, like teaching people about drugs, about integrating drug cultural references into the academy is linked up or tied up with this mess, right? And this mess means precursors and substances that arrive both in the United States and Europe as high quality or high price products generate a series of stepping stones or something like that, moments, different moments that draw a lot of attention, a lot of money, and generate a lot of violence in the sense of the struggle to control the trafficking routes, the distribution points, the entry points for the border. So if you see towards the north, there's very clear entry points to go to the States, and that means whatever product you have under the border, it's tenfold the price across the border, and then the further you go from the border, the price increases. That's exactly the same for here in Europe, so we can say that for cocaine, we can say that for imported methamphetamine. Methamphetamine is easier to produce in different places, so as I know there's some production of methamphetamine here in Czech Republic. There's production of methamphetamine everywhere, but high quality methamphetamine coming from super labs that were placed in Mexico by the United States is still imported or exported, let's say, from there, and imported in different places around the world, including Europe. So then all of these things change a little bit what happens within Mexico with the new psychoactive substances. So the market for new psychoactive substances is very small, obscure. It's linked to, let's say, drug enthusiasts who have access to the darknet, who have access to the deep web, who want to explore with new compounds, and that do not make use of the very big infrastructure of drug supply that exists in Mexico. And so that's why it's what we see in the numbers, right? Like I just put a few examples, but then what people usually test is MDMA or methamphetamine, let's say, cocaine, LSD, and classical drugs. And there is not much 2C family compounds, and there is not much cathinone compounds, and there is not much of these other compounds, and we are able to sometimes identify them through the thin layer chromatography, but it's something that it falls in the cracks or in the gaps of the lack of accuracy and proper mechanisms for testing, so the machines basically that cost a lot of money to run. I will say that as we learned, the ideal model, that is what is taking place in Spain, is to have the academic institution, which in that case is Barcelona Medical Hospital, linked to the city government, linked to civil society. So civil society does the ground level field work, making use of the community basically, and peer educators and volunteers who want to partake in the harm reduction interventions in the festival. So it's usually coming from festival goers and party goers and the community of young people who have been there, who have a concern about that community. And then it links to the research project of data collection and data gathering that goes to the database and the updates of the database within the academic institution. And then it links to the early warning alert system, and it links to the public policy updates and legislation process, decision-making process about what to do with that, with the information, with the trends that have been identified, and the different communities that are involved. In that model, the resources for the testing and running the HPLC and the MS machines comes from the university, so it's research money, basically. Each one of the runs for 50 samples is several thousand euros, basically. So, well, a few thousand euros, but then it's money that in an academic institution assigned to a lab is understandable, is money that is virtually non-existent for civil society efforts, thinking about that sense of 50 samples and then 500 samples and then years and years of work, let's say. So that is something that is inaccessible and unavailable without these intersectorial efforts. And then at the same time, the link of the government and Spain as a state and as a country to the European Union, to the European Monitoring Center for Drugs and Drug Addiction, to TEDI and the different projects that involve government agencies, means that they are the most up-to-date database on new psychoactive substances that is actually feeding the database of the EMCDDA. And that's because in the specific case of Spain, they have an open international drug checking service, which means anyone from anywhere in the planet can send their sample, basically breaking the law and breaking international law about sending scheduled compounds through the mail to them as a legal public service that has international scope. And then they can read about the testing results in their online free public database. And that means anyone can read of every testing result. Just the person who got the code for their sample knows which one is their own, right? And that's how they make the information public. But then the person who may be an LSD producer, who may be a seller, distributor of these compounds, knows about the quality. And just to go back to those questions that were raised and comments that were raised, the more information people have on their product, the safer it is for the entire chain of steps that this product goes through. Meaning, if someone is distributing drugs, it's good for them to know if it has fentanyl or if it doesn't have fentanyl. If someone knows their big batch of substance has fentanyl, the business approach is, well, I'm still going to sell it because I invested a lot of money in it and I need to get my money back. If that person has any sort of concern about their clients, about the sustainability of its business, which requires living, paying clients, probably how they're going to proceed with the distribution, packaging, measuring dosages of that batch and then selling them is going to be different if it has fentanyl or if it doesn't, and if they know about it or if they don't. And then in the next step, whoever receives a bag of a white powder, it's different for them to know if it has fentanyl than if it doesn't. And just to close a little bit this, a very clear example is Canada. So Canada is the only country that I know of where the fentanyl crisis is so prevalent, is so present, that it's not about fentanyl or not fentanyl. It doesn't matter if you want cocaine, methamphetamine, pills, MDMA, all of it has been found to contain fentanyl. Therefore, it's about how much fentanyl does it have. So if I'm going to inject heroin, if I'm going to inject cocaine, I need to know how much fentanyl there is in my sample so that I can measure properly so that I don't die, right? So this has meant in Canada the blending of the needle and syringe programs with drop-in centers in the traditional harm reduction framework of focusing on street drugs and community and most at-risk situations, living on the streets or whatever, injecting hard drugs, to the recreational use or users, the community of people who use drugs recreational, who supposedly have no harms yet, and in Spain they separate harm reduction from risk reduction. So harm reduction is injected, heroin, methamphetamine, hard drugs. Risk reduction is recreational drug use where there's no harm yet, but they're at risk. And they have blended this so that people can check their drugs in the supervised injection facilities and therefore know what's in their fix when they're going to inject. And people can come and check their drugs for the weekend festival so that they know what they're taking with them. So all of this is just to say, part of Input, the international network of people who use drugs strategy, and the traditional historical 25-year-long or 30-year-long harm reduction efforts is to bring closer and to engage the community of people who use drugs, the community of young people, the community of people who are addressed by these policies and these phenomena, to be part of the conversation and to share their experience, perception, and ideas so that it can be included in every step of policy development, meaning the design, the implementation, the evaluation, monitoring, and the follow-up, so that everyone is benefited from these efforts. Thank you so much.